worth it, isn't it?
It's definitely worth it, but men don't really demand, a lot. It's really just, powder, maybe some, I don't know what else besides powder. But there has to be a lot more. I personally just don't do too much. I guess that's why.
What are you supposed to do?
I don't
Foundation
know.
on your face,
Something
eyeliner,
on your
mascara,
I'm not saying anything.
I don't know. I have no idea.
lipsticks.
All right. Anyway, let's share with our viewers this morning what our top stories are on the program today.
Diplomacy. UAE president visits South Africa.
And of course, more on the Kenya cult saga. Autopsies confirm starvation.
Of
It's
course.
a huge story.
And also Workers' Day, May Day, NLC demands new retirement age.
Still on this morning, Akwa Ibom youths protest a remapping of their state. We'll look into that this morning.
And also Michael Wokorach, retirement player, says not yet. All these and more on Breakfast Central.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Welcome to the headlines this morning on Breakfast Central. We begin in West Africa with some Workers' Day updates will be served you this morning. Now, Nigeria's President-elect Bola Tinubu has promised a living wage that guarantees a decent life aimed at addressing workers' outcry over the current 30,000 naira national minimum wage. He made this known in a message to commemorate Workers' Day. The President-elect assured the labor force that he will fight to protect their interests. He adds that the fight is against poverty, ignorance, disease, disunity, ethnic and religious hate, and all negative forces that contend against the stability and prosperity of the country. Now, Japan's Prime Minister has arrived in Ghana on an African tour. He is also set to visit Kenya and Mozambique. The Prime Minister of Japan arrived at the Kotoka International Airport in Accra and is expected to hold a bilateral discussion with President Nana Akufo-Addo. Japan seeks to deepen her strong economic ties and further promote business and investment relations in Ghana, being one of the leading economic centers in West Africa. Japan has been supporting Ghana's infrastructure development, especially roads, to improve the country's transport connectivity. The Asian country has high hopes for Ghana, which hosts the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, to play a critical role in promoting regional integration and trade facilitation. In the north of the continent, we tell you that Tunisia's largest union on Monday attacked the government's handling of negotiations with the International Monetary Fund on a loan to bail out the North African country as it slides deeper into debt. Tunisia is seeking a bailout package worth nearly $2 billion from the IMF, which conditions aid on a series of reforms. As Noureddin Taboubi of the Tunisian General Labour Union was given his May Day speech in the capital, Tunis, protesters in the country's second city, Sfax, expressed their grievances. Despite an agreement in principle on the loan agreed in October, talks with the IMF have been stalled for months over President Kais Saied not committing to restructuring public bodies and lifting subsidies on basic goods.
أن تأكيدنا في الاتحاد على إيجابية هذا الموقف الصادر عن رئيس الجمهورية يجرنا إلى التساؤل عن الجدوى من تفاوض الحكومة مع صندوق النقد الدولي طوال أؤكد وقوف الاتحاد ودعمه بمناضلاته ومناضليه ودعمه الكامل لكل ضحايا هذه الهجمة التعسفية سواء الذين زج بهم في السجن أو الإيقاف كالأخوين أنيس الكعبي والناصر عم عمارة، والدليل على الزج بمناضلي الاتحاد في السجون وحياكة الملفات من قبل بعض الوزراء المعادين للعمل النقابي.
Elsewhere, Zimbabwe's ambassador to South Africa, David Hamaziripi, has urged Zimbabweans in South Africa to legalize their stay in the country. This comes as the Zimbabwe exemption permit is coming to an end on June 30, 2023. Hamaziripi was addressing Zimbabweans at the independence celebrations held in South Africa at the weekend. He also urged his fellow countrymen to abide by the laws of the host country.
We are guests in this country. And I want us to place ourselves in that position where we are a host to somebody. What is our expectation of our guest? Our expectation of our guest is that they will respect us. They will respect what we have set down as our ways of doing things. But in this country, the most important thing that we must respect are the immigration regulations. We really do not wish to have migration become an issue of contention between Zimbabwe and South Africa, because it's not a new phenomenon. Migration is essentially an old phenomenon between Zimbabwe and South Africa. And in fact,
in the east of the continent, UNICEF Communications Officer Doneglo Du says Sudanese refugees from the Tandelti region have crossed the Chadian border and are now in the village of Kofron. According to the United Nations, at least 20,000 Sudanese have sought refuge in Chad since the conflict began, of whom about 5,000 have registered. Battles are continuing between forces loyal to the head of the army, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the country's de facto ruler, and his deputy, Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, known as Emeti, who commands the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces Group.
Sur le site de Kufroun, où sont arrivés énormément de réfugiés qui ont traversé la frontière avec le Soudan, qui est toute proche. Aujourd'hui, on est en train de procéder à une distribution de kits d'urgence qui contiennent des nattes, des moustiquaires, des couvertures, des seaux, des casseroles, de quoi parer vraiment au plus pressé dans la toute première urgence pour ces gens dont certains sont arrivés sans rien. C'est un effort global de toute la communauté humanitaire et on est vraiment en train d'essayer d'avancer pour soulager le plus rapidement possible une partie de la souffrance de ces populations.
Les pathologies les plus rencontrées que nous obtenons dans les consultations, on rencontre beaucoup plus les infections respiratoires aiguës parce que les réfugiés que vous voyez sont exposés à la poussière, au froid, au vent. Ils sont sous les arbres, ils sont sans abri. Raison pour laquelle on rencontre beaucoup plus les infections respiratoires.
And that's all on the headlines at this hour. Over now to Asa and blessings.
All right, thank you very much, Lekon Onabanjo, for that. Of course, those headlines rather. Interesting one, seeing the first story that you shared, Nigeria's president-elect promising to give Nigerians a living wage. It will be interesting to know exactly how much he feels would be a decent enough living wage for Nigerians, how he feels the country can afford it, and you know, how they're going to go about it. Because once again, and I think I would always say this, you know, that these were conversations that should have been had in the build-up to the elections. There were times when there should have been presidential election debates that he didn't show up for. And then these are questions that should have been asked on, even if he didn't want to come for a debate, radio and television interviews that were scheduled that he didn't show up for either. So at this point, really, Nigerians do not know what the plans are, what his plans are, or how he would achieve any of these things that he's saying.
Well, the party has a manifesto, though it was rolled out in bits, and for him not to have come out to address the people during the presidential campaign elections, that is for him to answer. But the bottom line is, it's not just about making promises, because most times, or most often than not, they make promises without having all the facts and figures at that time. It's until when they get to the place of power and information are made available to them, then they see the reality on ground and they begin to turn the curve. So it's always important when you make those promises and be sure that you're going to live up to that promise, because it's what people are asking for. Expectations are high right now. You're coming in, you say you're going to do this, do it and do it right.
I think the truth is, it doesn't even have to do with knowing the facts and figures. Some people just make promises because they can. And the sad truth is, most of them don't even intend to keep it. And Nigerians are used to that, unfortunately. So they're not expecting too much of the government, which is really sad. But thank you so much, Leko, for giving us the news updates at this hour.
You're welcome.
All right, now stay with us. Let's now share with you more news updates, but now on the newspapers. What are the major stories making headlines across the continent? We'll be sharing them with you right next.
All right, we start with the Standard in Kenya, and the first story on the Standard newspaper is workers go home empty-handed amid protest talk. I mean, there's been protests for a while now, if you've been following the story, and there was a discussion, but unfortunately it says here that the workers went home empty-handed. Employees expected the government to focus on the high cost of living and probably get a pay raise. But speaker after speaker took their time to rail at the opposition over planned demonstration today. And you can find that on page 4, page 5, and page 6. Now, above the newspaper at the top there, you see Murate, cost of living likely to sink. According to Ruto's, cost of living likely to sink Ruto's government, I beg your pardon, and that is found on page 32 of the Standard. On page 32 still, you see chaos at Sudan port as locals flee. That's referring to the crisis in Sudan that has gone for the long time now. On page 45, it says, will Arsenal sing the blues at Emirates? That's a sports story you find on page 45. Then by the left of the newspaper, you see inside Mackenzie's doomsday teachings. Mackenzie is the pastor in Kenya, who told his followers to starve to see Jesus. That story is still being unfolded, and we're getting to discover new facts about the really, really horrendous happening at that farmland. Then it also says how Gitunguri is guarding his billions in death. Obviously, Gitunguri is dead, but I mean, there's an article here on page 4 that talks about how he is supposedly guarding his billions in death. And I think that's all we have on the Standard newspaper for this morning.
All right. And of course, it seems like the majority of the conversations across the continent on Workers' Day were, mostly about, pay rise, or pay increment, across the continent. And of course, better working and living conditions for workers. But that's on the Standard. We can also, of course, look at more stories in Kenya this morning on the Daily Nation. It says here, Ruto's new salary plan for workers. We can also find more details on that and see what President William Ruto is thinking about. Still in the eastern part of the continent, of course, the picture there, President William Ruto announced a new salary policy that will set equal pay for workers in public and private sector, even as he defended extra pension and medical deductions that have shrunk workers' pay slips. That's on pages 4, 5, and 6. Cult strangled members. It says here, deadly beliefs. Some of the victims of the cult operating in the Kilifi Shakahola village were killed by suffocation and strangulation. Post-mortem examination conducted yesterday on some of the 110 bodies exhumed has revealed. That's on page 12. I knew it. I always knew in the build-up to the story, when it was still about 30 bodies that had been found, 70 bodies, and then, seeing that a lot of them had been buried, I knew that there was almost no way that these people were just found dead and buried. Someone very likely also took part in murdering some of all these people.
And then the sad thing is, they said some people who refused to participate in the fasting were also killed.
Yeah.
Wow.
You don't disobey your daddy Gio. Well, I mean, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how this ends or where this leads. Also on the Daily Nation this morning, protests, rivals dig in amid calls for restraint. President Ruto and Azimio chief Raila Odinga have maintained hardline positions over today's planned opposition protest, even as calls for restraint dominated Labor Day celebrations. These are the stories that we can take on the Daily Nation newspapers. And of course, we'll move away from Kenya and see what we can find in Nigeria this morning on The Punch.
All right, on The Punch, you see one of the top stories there says, Tinubu promises top decisions. NLC demands new retirement age on page 62. Now, the Labour recommends 65 years retirement age, a 40-year length of service. And it also says President-elect seeks understanding, says hard decisions coming soon. Well, we'll see how that pans out. Then on page 41, the National Association of Resident Doctors fumes as Ngige condemns doctors' entitlement mentality. I don't even know what that is. I mean, you're asking these doctors not to go out, not to relocate, and then there should be a promise at least that you take care of them. And these people are saying that they're not getting enough, they're not getting the value for their worth, and now you're condemning their entitlement mentality. What is it? Should they go or should they stay? Now on page 41, the police DSS INEC joint panel invites suspended Adamawa rec. On page 20, we see subsidy salary payment unlikely after June, says Obaseki. Beneath on page 8, Sudan, Egypt opens border for stranded Nigerians. I mean, we've been talking about Nigerians trying to evacuate Sudan for about 2 days now, and there's an update to that story. Egypt has opened their border for stranded Nigerians. And on page 4 and 5, lawless naval ratings brutalize Ogun man over parking space. Then page 8, Senate presidency, Akpabio meets Buhari and defends ambition. You find that story on page 8. And one of the biggest stories, the forefront of the newspaper, you see cars moving in something that looks like a flooded area. It says motorists stranded as flood takes over Lagos-Ibadan Express Long Bridge. And that is found on page 4 of the Punch newspaper. Those are the stories we can take on the Punch newspaper.
Right. And now let's move away from the Punch and see what's on the Nation newspapers this morning and share with you. It says there, pay rise coming for health workers, lecturers, and others. And that's, should be great news for workers in Nigeria. Still on the Nation this morning, Ngige counters Obaseki over no cash to pay salary claim. 1,350 more Nigerians leave Khartoum. 27 buses head for Port Sudan. And also Nigeria's forex reserves lose $1.82 billion. Inflows decline. And also government officials suspended over alleged salary padding. That's on page 5. One or two other stories this morning. Strike notice by resident doctors absurd, says minister. And also JAM to release UTME results today. It is... I remember, these moments back then when JAM results.
The tension. Everybody in your family is literally waiting.
Good luck to all who took the exams. All right, these are the stories that we can share on the Nation newspapers this morning. Not very many left. Of course, congratulations, or not congratulations, good news. Ex-NBA President Wale has been freed. If you remember, a few weeks ago, he was kidnapped somewhere in the southern part of the country. He has been set free, and that's on the Nation this morning. These are the stories that we can share for this part of Breakfast Central. We have more newspapers coming your way in the second half of Breakfast Central. But for now, stay with us. We're moving into our top stories next and sharing with you some of the big conversations we have on the program today.
Opinions are free, facts are sacred, but truth is universal.
How, in practical terms,
can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
President must see himself as the President of the Federal Republic.
On Digi 360, we give you a complete dose of everything.
I hardly believe what politicians say in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.
We delve into the issues, dissect it so that you can understand it. Use it to take action. Digi 360, dissecting the issues.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
Kuna kallon News Central TV.
Welcome once again to Breakfast Central. The South African government has addressed speculation surrounding a recent visit by the President of the United Arab Emirates to the country's poorest province. UAE President and ruler of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and a large entourage of 500 people visited the Eastern Cape province 2 weeks ago, causing a stir when they landed their private planes at the Bulembu airport in Bisho, a military base decommissioned in the 1990s.
Now, Nahyan paid for upgrades to the airport amounting to $1 million so that he could have easy access to his privately owned game reserve for a quiet holiday to mark the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The visit received a negative reaction from South Africans who accused the government of enabling another Gupta Gate. But this week, the government insisted that all processes were followed when the UAE president's plane landed. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is the international relations expert from the University of Northwest, Professor Jan Venter. Thank you, Professor Jan, for joining us.
Good morning, guys. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, Professor Jan, Nahyan's visit has caused an uproar among South Africans, and they are referring to the Gupta Gate, and I believe that that's what happened a few years ago when number one, like they call him, Jacob Zuma, allowed one of his friends to land a private airplane on a military base because they wanted to visit or attend a wedding. And, a lot of people were saying that was an insult to the military. And we're seeing that happen again. So what do you make of this controversy that surrounds the UAE's president's visit to South Africa?
Well, I think that the problem is money was exchanged in lieu of the privilege to land the private plane. So immediately you get the idea that South Africa is open for business and not in a good way. So South Africa is presenting the picture of a soft state with porous borders, if you have 20 million to upgrade a landing zone for yourself, you are welcome to do business with a regional government or with the ANC. And that is not the picture of a state taking care of itself. It's more the picture of corruption. And that's the problem. The whole idea of do no evil, and especially do not present the idea that you are doing evil. And I think that South Africa shot itself in the foot. For 20 million US rand, 1 million US dollars, and it's another foreign policy blunder by the South African government, unfortunately.
Oh, very, very interesting. And of course, it continues to add to the controversy surrounding the Cyril Ramaphosa government. Now, of course, in addition to the arrival of the president, there was also some controversy around how the entourage's visas were processed. The South African government has gone through extra lengths to explain their procedures. Do you think there's also more to all of this going on? We've also seen lately there's been some level of political alignments and military alignments by the South African government. Is this, something that we may not be aware of, with regards this particular relationship with the UAE?
I think that South Africa is actually quite desperate to gain partners of repute in the international environment, especially in the Middle East, especially amongst the oil-producing nations or thereabouts. And I think that we are perhaps falling over our own feet to get those relations going. I don't think that the government sees this situation as something that they won't do for anybody else. And that's the problem. With the visit of Putin coming up, perhaps they will do something special for him as well. And the question is, for whom else will the South African government not maybe make special arrangements? I think that the government has made it clear that the diplomatic and systematic clearances for all the people was done according to rules, but you have the feeling that there is a special dispensation for certain people, that not all people are treated equally, and that is not that does not make sense in the democratic environment that South Africa proposes, where all people are equal. Now it looks like some people are more equal than others. And I think that is very difficult. South Africa is creating difficulty for itself in the international environment as well.
Okay. I mean, now let's assume that, there was no controversy surrounding the arrival of Nayan and the 50 persons he was flanked by, and also given that the processes were followed. Is it safe to assume that this visit is an opportunity to generate revenue and also create jobs for a province that especially has a very high unemployment rate?
I think it is an opportunity for the province to showcase itself, but on a limited scale. The emir that came here already knows the province. He owns a game farm here. So the 500 guests that he brought here will be taken to his game farm. I don't think that it will be job creation or an opportunity for South African people. He brought his own people. He brought his own helicopter. He brought his own ambulance. So how much of an opportunity can that be for South African people? Maybe the investment that he made was something that South Africa can be glad for. But I'm highly critical of the whole process where somebody can spend money and then receive a special dispensation just because he or she is head of government. We are a democratic country, and that means that everybody must be treated the same. We've got the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and everybody must fall under that Bill of Rights. And there are ways and channels for creating jobs and for making, for creating opportunities for people. I think maybe the world is now more curious about the Eastern Province, but limited opportunities. I think that this is unfortunate, another case where the foreign policy of South Africa failed the country.
How would you respond to people who say, well, first of all, the UAE would not allow South Africa build, its own runway or fix its own runway in the UAE, but those who also say that, the president of the UAE has diplomatic immunity, so he doesn't necessarily need to go through customs and immigration and some of all of that. What would your response be to that?
Well, I think that the 500 people that he brought with him surely would have to go through processes. And I am actually protesting the president that is created. So who will the next person be that is granted special privileges? And how does this special privileges that is extended to the president of the UAE, how does that look to the world? Does it present South Africa as a strong country, looking out for its people? Or is it a country that is available for $1 million US? Then you can land wherever you want. You can land your airplane wherever you want.
I mean, speaking of how this presents the people and the country in general, do you think that these actions and, this criticism that that arose because of what happened will torpedo the diplomatic ties? I mean, that's like the major reason why the visit even happened in the first place. So do you think that these criticisms surrounding it will actually affect the diplomatic relationships?
No, I don't think it will affect the diplomatic relationship. I think that the elites, the governments, have their own way of communicating, have their own level of communication. I think that they will perhaps be more circumspect in the future, but I don't think that there's any harm done to the diplomatic relationship between South Africa and the UAE.
All right, and what would you say? Of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa, if he has to respond, what would you say his response should be to those who criticize, some of all of this? And of course, you may also want to chip in. I think I mentioned this earlier. The whole, political alignments, that seem to be changing across the world. The BRICS arrangement that South Africa is getting, itself involved with, and some of all of that. So, what would President Ramaphosa's argument be?
Yeah, I think President Ramaphosa's argument would be that he is busy with the realignment of South Africa's core diplomatic relationships. And I think that he should continue with that. And I think that relationships in Africa and the Middle East is very important for South Africa. I think we should absolutely continue that and strengthen that. But it should not be done in such a way that it seems that we are granting people privileges and that some people might have more privileges than other people, especially if they are willing to spend money in South Africa.
All right, international relations expert from the University of Northwest, Professor Jan Venter. Thank you so much for your time with us.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Okay, now let's go to Kenya and see the update on the stories that we have been following for a while now. The first autopsies on Monday on corpses found in mass graves linked to the Kenyan pastor suspected of inciting followers to fast to death confirmed starvation as the cause of death, although some victims were asphyxiated. Now, expert carrying out the first postmortems on more than 100 bodies unearthed in a coastal forest examined 9 children aged 1 to 10, as well as 1 woman.
The chief government pathologist, Johansen Odua, says most of the victims had features of starvation after the autopsies took place in a hospital morgue in the town of Malindi. In a case that erupted last month, horrifying a deeply religious nation, cult leader Paul Mackenzie Tenje is accused of urging followers to find God through starvation. And, I have questioned, all of this personally. And I think I even got to ask myself, what is a thing that your spiritual father, religious father, daddy G.O., mommy G.O. is going to ask of you in order to see God or to, and to go to heaven, and you will tell them no?
I think that people who are overly religious, extremists, don't know where to draw the line. But my own concern when I read this story basically was, I know that there's been a debate about, the government, checking the activities, regulating the activities of religious bodies and all, but isn't there a line? Isn't there boundaries that shouldn't be crossed? I think in 2019, this same man was arrested after 2 children died of starvation.
Yes.
And then he was released on a bond of I don't know how much. And that this happened. You didn't investigate. You arrested him, quite all right, but you let him go, right?
Yeah.
There's only, it was only a matter of time before we saw these kind of situations.
Well, here's the thing, what would you describe as a crime enough to either stop a religious body from practicing or arrest its pastor? Because these things can still be deemed free will. Nobody is being forced. Nobody is being, basically forced. And so he can simply claim that people acted, with their own free will. If you remember when this story broke, I remember that a couple of people that were rescued, that were found in the mountain region and were rescued before they died, refused to eat because they still were saying to themselves that their spiritual father or their pastor had told them that they should starve to death. Yeah. And they refused to still eat even after being rescued. So he can simply claim, they all acted, on their own free will.
Okay,
and so at that point, the government or the police can't
So
act.
let's say they can't hold them, on account of the fact that they acted on free will. But I'm saying that there should be a level of monitoring, seeing how such has happened before. Before all of these bodies were unearthed, right? You hear stories of families that the mother just wakes up one morning and takes her passport and takes a flight, Those activities should have been monitored. This farmland, I don't know if it's this exact one, but news making rounds on social media says a very successful aviation worker, beautiful, donated her land for these kind of things. I think that all of those things should have been checked.
Once again, if it's not breaking any laws and it is being done, through the person's free will, you can't accuse them of anything or check anything. If I get home, if I was married, or if you were married, or if we were married.
What is wrong with you?
And then you get home someday, I'm your husband, we've been married for 5 years, we have 2 kids. And then you get home someday after work and realize that I have taken, our property documents, our cars, and taken them to the church, and donated them to the church. What are you going to tell the police? Nothing.
Well, but if death is involved, of children?
So it's a different case if the actions of these people are, likely to cause harm to the public or cause harm to other people. But if it is a self-imposed, if it's an action that I'm taking for my own free will, because I believe in what my pastor said, you can't accuse anybody of anything or really stop anything. You can only advise people against it. I'm shocked that people would actually hold their breath or stop eating until they die. I'm shocked at the level of indoctrination and the level of extremism that people can get to. But it's, once again, not different from any other person who wears a suicide vest and goes into a crowded place to blow themselves up. It's the exact same thing. It's that level of extremism that you would, you don't mind losing your life because your religion or because your religious, body or father told you so. And so I feel like the one of the things, yes, I understand there should be some level of regulation with religious bodies, but there's only so much that the government can do. But I feel like another thing is there have to be more conversations, that reduce the grip and the hold that Africans have on religion.
Yeah.
It cannot be this bad. I understand, yes, it comes from, there are many, many reasons, the foundation, or the reasons where the Africans have this grip on religion, or religion has this grip on Africans, rather. But that's what I feel needs to start being worked on. This grip. It feels like we're in a chokehold,
yeah.
With religion.
And another thing that baffles me, right? Africans are not, we're not exactly known to be so inquisitive, but in a situation where someone is asking you to fast and you're seeing people dying and the person is not dying, and let's ask questions like, what are you doing? Why are you still alive? Why are you not seeing Jesus yet?
So I feel like, there will be further investigations. People would be called as witnesses. There would be questions, to find out exactly how all of this played out. How many times did he preach this message? If he is, these are still accusations. So, at this point, I think it's fair to say that, he's still being accused of, he's not been found guilty as allegations, So I'm hoping that the Kenyan government does all it possibly can to understand exactly what happened and how this played out. Because it's not the first time that we've heard of things like this. I've said it before that in history, in the 70s, I think there was, in the 90s or the 80s, there was the Jonestown massacre, there was the Heaven's Gate, which are some of the most popular ones across the world, where almost 900 people, were killed in a church. The same process, the same spiritual father said that we should all enter this church and kill ourselves. Or there's one of them where he took his whole congregation church and burnt them.
Yeah, and started
there's one where he asked them to take, poison. So these things have happened in history before. It just makes me question what grip religion should have, what level of extremism that you have with your religion, that you now become a dangerous person, not just to yourself, but to society. And those are the things that we need to start reducing. But the continent is an interesting place to live, and it's gonna be pretty hard. And I would just mention that the Jonestown and Heaven's Gate didn't happen in Africa, so it's not just in Africa that you have that.
It's not an African mentality. Yeah, there's brainwashing everywhere, really.
But we will encourage the Kenyan government and, of course, that region, whoever's in charge of that region, to make sure that they have a proper investigation. I'm hoping that the numbers stop. Sometime last week we were at 90 or 73, and then we're at 90, and then now we're at 110. I'm hoping that it stops. I'm hoping that they do not, in the next couple of days, say that they found another mass grave.
Looking at how long it lasted, Osauki, there's no guarantee that the numbers will stop.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee.
Insane. Well, those are the latest from the Shakahola forest in Kenya, where, of course, Pastor Paul Mackenzie and his followers, of course, are creating some of the biggest stories in the continent. Unfortunately, really sad stories. Stay with us. We'll move into the world of sports and see what the latest is over there. That comes up right next.
Now Hello and welcome to Sports Update on Breakfast Central. I'm Udoka Njoku. Now, Kenya Volleyball Federation men's league side Trailblazers have pulled out of the Africa Club Championships set for the 8th to the 21st of May in Tunis, Tunisia, due to financial constraints. Trailblazers withdrawal leaves champions Kenya Port Authority as the country's only representative at the upcoming Continental Showpiece. Trailblazers had been invited to the competition after the league champions GSU withdrew due to unavoidable circumstances. Now, Trailblazers finished third in the league after recording a resounding 3-0 win in the playoff played in August 2022. And to rugby now, news media in Uganda earlier on Monday announced the retirement of former Rugby Cranes captain Michael Wokorach from international rugby. In an exclusive chat with News Central, Wokers revealed it is time for him to let others lead while he follows for one more year. He also said he has not retired and that the media got the message wrong. The 32-year-old captain, he captained the team at several major competitions like the Commonwealth Games, the Challenger Series, 2 Rugby World Cup 7 events, and the annual Rugby Africa Men's Sevens. So for Wokorach, he has said that the media got the story wrong and he has not retired yet. It is just a bit of change of management. And straight to England, let's talk about Arsenal as manager Mikel Arteta has insisted his side are still contenders for the Premier League title despite slipping to the second position at the weekend. Arteta's men were replaced at the summit by Manchester City following their 2-1 win at Fulham on Sunday. Now City lead the Gunners by a point with a game in hand after winning 8 successive league matches as they eye the 5th title in 6 years. Arsenal are assured of a return to Champions League football after a 6-season absence from Europe's leading club competition. But then, manager Mikel Arteta stressed that the Gunners are not satisfied with that achievement alone. And for Arteta, he now wants Arsenal, beaten 4-1 by City last week, to stage a revival when they face London rivals Chelsea at the Emirates on Tuesday. Now let's listen to Mikel Arteta. I mean, he said a whole lot about that game. I'm looking forward to the one against Chelsea. But let's look at the game that went down yesterday. Leicester City taking on Everton. It ended in a 2-2 draw with Nigeria international Alex Iwobi getting the equalizer for Everton after missing a couple of chances earlier in that game. So for Leicester, they are still around the relegation zone. But of course, if they get to win the remainder of their games, they will survive being relegated from the EPL this season. And we told you earlier, today Arsenal will take on Chelsea at the Emirates, hoping that they can actually bounce back from the losses and dropping of points in 4 successive games. All right, Ukrainian athletes will boycott this month's World Judo Championships in Qatar over concerns about Russian and Belarusian participation. The International Judo Federation decided to allow athletes from Russia and Belarus to compete as neutrals. The decision will allow judokas from those countries to participate in qualifying for the 2024 Olympic Games. Last month, the International Olympic Committee said Russian and Belarusian athletes are allowed to compete under a neutral flag, but then it has yet to make a decision on Paris 2024. Now, the International Olympic Organizing Committee also recommended athletes and support personnel who actively support the war in Ukraine or who are contracted to the military should not be permitted to compete. The Ukrainian Judo Federation alleged that a number of Russian judoka are registered for the World Judo Championships, which takes place between the 7th and the 14th of May, are active servicemen. But the IJF said it has enlisted an independent company to perform background checks on Russian and Belarusian athletes with specific reference to possible war propaganda. Wrapping up with basketball this morning, talking about the NBA playoffs. Philadelphia 76ers look like they are the team to beat. Of course, they defeated Boston Celtics 119 to 115 points, taking the semifinal series 1-0. While the other game saw Denver Nuggets defeating the Phoenix Suns, and that game ended 97 to 87 points, making it 2-0 in the series. So a big one for the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid leading his team to yet again another victory. And that's a wrap on Sports Updates on Breakfast Central. I am Udoka Njoku. Good morning, Osarage. Good morning, blessings.
Good morning, Udoka. Thank you for giving us a sports update. I mean, what's up with the Wokorot story? Is it that he changed his mind or, I mean...
Oh, well, yesterday it was announced that he retired, actually, but of course, it was more like a miscommunication between the player and the news media in Uganda. But he came out yesterday after a chat with Onyinyechi Obaro. He said he has not retired. It is just a change of captaincy, and he'll remain with the team for a year before he calls it quits.
Okay. Interesting there. Thanks a lot for those stories. I pray Arsenal and Chelsea both lose. We'll see you again pretty soon, Udoka.
Thank you very much.
All right. Now let's take you through a quick recap of some of the stories that we've shared so far on Breakfast Central.
Well, we talked about diplomacy, the United Arab Emirates president visiting South Africa.
And also more on the Kenya cult saga, autopsies confirm starvation, and a lot more.
Well, Kenya's Trailblazers withdrew due to financial constraint in sport.
But that's not all this morning. We have a lot more coming your way in the second half of Breakfast Central. And this is some of the things that we'll be talking about. Workers' Day, NLC demands new retirement age.
Also coming up, Akwa Ibom youth protest remapping of state.
Still this morning, Nigerian workers should get paid between 100,000 and 250,000 naira, says Shore.
You will do well.
Thank you, Granny.
Just make sure you work very hard.
So, what do you think, sir?
I like it. Oh, what did the bank say? The bank said they need about 48 hours, sir. I'll transfer the 20 million myself.
The money's in. Pay the transport company. We need materials on site yesterday.
Let's go.
Fill him up! And let's call our people while we're at it.
Introducing Money Master and Money Master G-Collar, the quicker and more dependable way to master your money. I think you deserve a raise. Dial *995# to send, receive, pay, and save, all from the comfort of your home floor. Money Master, the easy way to master your money.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
The Pastor Paul Mackenzie story. Lekon, if you can hear us, let's get you in on this conversation.
Okay.
If you've been following the story on the Shakahola forest and of course Paul Mackenzie, are there things that your spiritual father would ask of you that you would simply say no and change church?
Okay, so first off, I don't have a spiritual father.
Wow. Lekon and I attend the same church.
They only see us okay once a year.
If I'm going to have a spiritual father, if I'm going to say I have a spiritual father, it will definitely be God. Jesus, as the case may be, because I'm a Christian. But the bottom line is, you see, there are some things that you don't just take hook, line, and sinker because some people choose to be, or some people choose to be a father figure, or you choose to accept these people as your spiritual head, as the case may be, because there might be some things that they will say that might not really be in consonance with what is contained in the Holy Scriptures, whichever religion you belong to. And because you feel you are obligated to them to obey them, as it were, then you would accept whatever it is they say, and it will go against what is actually contained in what you truly believe in. So why don't you just keep hold of your faith, believe in what the scripture says or the religion that you choose to follow, and let that be your compass, your religious compass for how you choose to live your life, instead of listening to a human figure, irrespective of if that person is a religious head or not.
Well, spot on. Thank you so much, Lekon, for sharing your thoughts on that. I mean, we're still following the Kenya story, and we're going to give the viewers the update on how it goes. But thank you once again. You will still be on standby to give us the headline stories very shortly.
Definitely, I'll do that now. We take a look at the headlines again, and we begin in West Africa, where Senegalese and opposition leader Ousmane Sonko said that foreign laboratories have revealed that a gas that police sprayed at him in March was toxic and deadly, accusing them of trying to assassinate him. Sonko had said in mid-March that he felt unwell because of tear gas sent by the police during his forced transfer to the Dakar court, where he was charged of defaming Tourism Minister Mame Mbaye Niang. The opposition leader had said after the incident that he spent 5 days in a private clinic in Dakar for treatment, and that samples had been taken from his clothes and sent or brought to check their content. Last month, Senegalese government spokesman, Trade Minister Abdul Karim Fofana, denied Sonko's accusation that police had been involved. The opposition has denounced a plot to keep Sonko out of next year's election, an accusation which the government denies, accusing him of provoking demonstrations to avoid justice. Now, Japan's Prime Minister has arrived in Ghana on an African tour. He is also set to visit Kenya and Mozambique. The Prime Minister of Japan arrived at the Kotoka International Airport in Accra and is expected to hold a bilateral discussion with President Nana Akufo-Addo. Japan seeks to deepen her strong economic ties and further promote business and investment relations in Ghana, being one of the leading economic centers in West Africa. Japan has been supporting Ghana's infrastructure development, especially roads, to improve the country's transport connectivity. The Asian country has high hopes for Ghana, which hosts the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, to play a critical role in promoting regional integration and trade facilitation. And now in the north of the continent, we tell you that Tunisia's largest union on Monday attacked the government's handling of negotiations with the International Monetary Fund on a loan to bail out the North African country as it slides deeper into debt. Tunisia is seeking a bailout package worth nearly $2 billion from the IMF, which conditions aid on a series of reforms. As Noureddin Taboubi of the Tunisian General Labour Union was giving his May Day speech in the capital, Tunis, protesters in the country's second city, that's Sfax, expressed their grievances. Despite an agreement in principle on the loan agreed in October, talks with the IMF have been stalled for months over President Kais Saied not committing to restructuring public bodies and the lifting of subsidies on basic goods.
على إيجابية هذا الموقف الصادر عن رئيس الجمهورية يجرنا إلى التساؤل عن الجدوى من تفاوض الحكومة مع صندوق النقد الدولي طوال أؤكد وقوف الاتحاد ودعمه بمناضلاته ومناضليه ودعمه الكامل لكل ضحايا هذه الهجمة التعسفية، سواء الذين زج بهم في السجن أو الإيقاف كالأخوين أنيس الكعبي والناصر عن عمارة، والدليل على الزج بمناضلي الاتحاد في السجون وحياكة الملفات من قبل بعض الوزراء المعادين للعمل النقابي وشن الحملات المسعورة ونشر الأكاذيب
But I'll tell you that Zimbabwe's ambassador to South Africa, David Amaziripi, has urged Zimbabweans in South Africa to legalize their stay in the country. This comes as the Zimbabwe exemption permit is coming to an end on June 30, 2023. Amaziripi was addressing Zimbabweans at the independence celebrations held in South Africa at the weekend. He also urged his fellow countrymen to abide by the laws of the host country.
In this country. And I want us to place ourselves in that position when we are a host to somebody. What is our expectation of our guest? Our expectation of our guest is that they will respect us. They will respect what we have set down as our ways of doing things. But in this country, the most important thing that we must respect are the immigration regulations. We really do not wish to have migration become an issue of contention between Zimbabwe and South Africa, because it's not a new phenomenon. Migration is a centuries-old phenomenon between Zimbabwe and South Africa, and in fact in the entire Southern Africa region. And we need to ensure that it remains a positive thing and not a negative thing. So I want to appeal to all of you, please let's make sure that we are documented, we have the permits to be in this country. If we are not, let's make every effort to ensure that we regularize our stay. Clearly and certainly, if you are.
And now to the east of the continent, the United Nations has warned that more than 800,000 people could flee fighting and dire conditions in Sudan, where explosions again shook the capital in violation of the latest truce extension agreed by warring generals. The chaos and bloodshed, now in its third week, have already sparked an exodus of tens of thousands of Sudanese to neighboring countries, including Egypt, Chad, and Central African Republic. Hundreds have been killed and thousands wounded since fighting erupted on April 15 between Sudan's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his former deputy Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, who commands the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Millions of Sudanese unable to afford the inflated prices required to escape have sheltered in the rooms with dwindling food and water and frequent power cuts. And that's all at this hour. It's now back to Osa and Blessings.
Thank you very much, Lekon. Interesting stories there across the continent, and we'll be seeing you again at 9.
Definitely. I'll be there.
All right. And now let's take you through, of course, the newspapers once again. What are the major stories making headlines across the continent? We'll be sharing them with you again, starting here in Nigeria.
All right, we start with the Daily Trust. And the first story, the biggest story there says, I'll give you living wage. Tinubu promises workers. We'll see how that works out. That is found on page 4 and page 14. Buhari tells president-elect to respect their rights. That's Tinubu. Labour demands better deals. The CAN harps on decent working conditions. And the PDP tells workers to resist anti-democratic forces. But as for Tinubu's promise, we'll see how that goes. Then on page 8 and 9, it says, if loyalty and commitment deserve reward, Sani Jaji should be next rep speaker, Dr. Sani says. Then on page 7, Egypt opens borders for Nigerians fleeing Sudan. I think that's like one major story across the headlines this morning. On page 14, cancer scare. Nigeria bans importation of Indomie noodles. I think when I saw this story, it really just gave me, like, my heart just started beating faster. Because, I mean, the Indomie noodles is like one thing an average family eats in Nigeria here, like almost every day. And even for students, that's like their go-to food, you know, aside Gary, of course.
I can go 10 years without remembering it.
Well, that's you. Normal, average.
I can comfortably go, you know, a lifetime.
Yeah, but I mean, but for some people, it's time. It saves time. And
I get
also,
it.
Yeah,
it's a very popular food. I actually even thought it was mostly made here in Nigeria. I'm shocked that they imported it.
Yeah. I mean, I think some are made in Nigeria, but some
imported.
are imported. Yeah. And now it's giving cancer scare. But anyways, you can find the story on page 14 of the Daily Trust newspaper, and on page 19. Dangote commits over 9.2 trillion naira to Pan-African investment. Interesting. That's good to see. But, well, that's all we have on Daily Trust newspaper.
All right. Now let's go to the Guardian newspapers this morning. Still here in Nigeria. It says workers demand better pay amid subsidy and debt concerns. I hope the government is listening. Of course, you can see a picture there of President Muhammadu Buhari, the president-elect, the Minister of Labour, Christian Gige, NLC President Joe Ajaero, and of course, Osifo. Telecoms operators reject proposed supervision by NITDA. And also, NAFTA begins probe on safety of Indomie noodles today, says the DG. Very few brief stories actually on the Guardian. New Emirate Councils here to stay. Ganduje tells Kwankwaso. And of course, WHO issues alert as high-risk season for meningitis and others sets in. These are the stories that we can share this morning on the Guardian newspapers and all that we have. But let's move away from Nigeria and see what we can find in Uganda.
Now to Uganda, we look at the Daily Monitor, and it says Museveni to start new anti-corruption body. Well, I don't know whether it's about how many anti-corruption bodies it takes to kick out the actual corruption, but anyways, Museveni is set to start a new anti-corruption body. That is a promise for the Labour Day. The president used yesterday's celebration to promise yet another anti-corruption unit inside State House, with the proposed body this time being dedicated to combating bribery in public offices. That story is found on page 4 and page 5. Then at the top of the newspaper, you see tenders. URA Finance Soroti Fruit Factory, the WHO, EC, PSFU, the Minister of Lands, Masindi, as well as all of them. Now, Rainbow Mungudit, working hard for football stardom, is a young chap who is hoping to make it big in football. On page 6, Parliament to retable anti-gay bill today. It's been a long time discussion about the anti-gay bill, and the Parliament is set to retable the bill today. Then also on the Daily Monitor on page 2, Kasese floods claim 5 lives in 1 week. A very devastating story. It says the floods have ravaged several sub-counties in Kasese district, washing away crops and destroying property, and obviously also claiming lives. And on page 3, Nema drive on dustbin starts today. Well, that is all we can take. Beneath you see Congolese refugees stranded in Busia on page 28. And on page 26 is an article on why hepatitis B continues to plague the West now. That's all for the Daily Monitor.
All right, and now let's go to Zimbabwe on the Daily News this morning. Just a few stories. It says cops in push to avert poll chaos. Especially trained officers are deployed around Zimbabwe. ZANU-PF open to reform bids. That's also something you can find out more about. It's an article by Blessings Mashaya.
Wow.
All right. Also on the Daily News this morning, I think that's entertainment, says a new collabo, Hilary Kuchinani courts progress Chief Fumo. Not very many stories, actually. I think these are the only ones, relevant stories that we can find on the Daily News in Uganda. But of course, the big one there says cops in push to avert poll chaos. Especially trained officers are deployed around Zimbabwe. These are the stories that we can share on the newspapers this morning, and these are the major stories basically across the continent, from Zimbabwe to Uganda to Kenya, and of course Nigeria and South Africa. We of course will move into our top stories next to share with you some of our own top stories this morning.
You wake up to a lot of stories about Africa.
But this is where you get the story straight.
Where we explore different angles because we understand our stories.
There's that passion when it's your perspective and not a distant perception.
I know you hear it a lot, but it's true. Nobody can tell your story better than you.
That's what we do.
All day, every day,
on News Central TV.
Our African stories by Africans
for Africans.
Skyline's a byline, you watch how we define and listen when we speak, you better listen, cause it's your turn. Now it's your turn. Your turn.
Glow Data, your front row seat to the world of entertainment. Nobody does video streaming better. Dial *777# now.
Unatazama runinga ya New Central.
You're still watching Breakfast Central on this bright and beautiful morning. And of course, bringing to you our top stories. We're still discussing May Day celebration. That's Workers' Day celebration, which was the 1st of May 2023. Now, still in the spirit of celebrating Workers' Day, the Nigeria Labour Congress has asked for a fresh retirement age for civil servants in the country. The NLC president, Joe Ajaero, made the call during the 2023 Workers' Day celebration on Monday in Abuja. Ajaero also called for a general review of core civil servants' salaries to narrow the gap between other civil servants' emoluments and those in other segments of the public service.
Now, he said that the extension of years of service should go around as it had been done in other sectors of the public service in the country. Only a few other establishments, including the core civil service, are now left out. Also adding that the union had, over the years, demanded salary review, but had yet to receive the federal government's attention. And of course, these are all, some of the feedback from the Workers' Day or the Labor Day yesterday here in Nigeria and of course, in other parts of the continent and of the country. But does how many people, or rather, do a lot of people agree with Joe Ajaero? And asides agreeing, the Nigerian government also needs to, and it's one of the things that I mentioned earlier. Can the government afford, a salary increment? Can it afford, an increment of retirement age? Can it also, afford to, have an adjusted minimum wage? Omoyele Sowore, one of the presidential aspirants, also mentioned that, the Nigeria's minimum wage should increase from 100,000 or should be about 100,000 to 250,000.
Yeah.
Can the government afford it? The answer is yes. If we're being serious, the Nigerian government can afford it. Can afford
But will they do it instantly?
So it's not if they will do it. When I say they can afford it, if they truly were serious about minimizing and reducing government wastage, if they were serious about blocking the leakages in government and the amount of ways that the Nigerian government's income just disappears, we will be able to afford a lot more if we reduce the amount of money that we used for a lot of things that were really just depleting the funds of the country. If we, of course, stopped paying subsidy on petrol, would save a lot more money.
Yeah.
There's many ways that the Nigerian government, if it was a serious government, if we were able to invest properly in agriculture and increase the amount of foreign exchange that we get from agriculture, from information technology and some of all of that, we can afford it. But
I think it was just yesterday we were talking about outsourcing some things that should be done in Nigeria to foreign bodies, and that would definitely cost us much more.
Yeah. So yes, there should be a stronger conversation. But unfortunately, and this is one I would always say it, when we have conversations with people, because the current government is out of power in 28 days, 29, 28 days. And so there should have been proper conversations with aspirants, to understand who has this level of interest for the Nigerian worker, who will be willing to increase the retirement age of the Nigerian worker, who believes that the Nigerian worker should have a high retirement age. Those are things that they should have, spoken about. But, we didn't get to have a lot of those conversations. We can only refer to their manifesto and say, okay, this is what the manifesto says here or there. But we'll see. Now, let's move to the southern part of the country, where angry youths drawn from the eastern Obolo local government area of Akwa Ibom State on Saturday took to the streets to protest plans by the state government to remap the state. A quick reminder that the bill is titled State Map Establishment Bill, passed by the state legislature, is now awaiting Governor Udom Emmanuel's assent. The bill had sparked a pocket of protest by youths from other local government areas of Mbo and Ibeno in the state, who have expressed resentment over the bill and vowed that it would not sail through. The youths generally expressed their anger and spread charms along the road, and occasionally gulped dry gin and beer. I'm not sure how that, affects the bill. Displaying placards of various inscriptions. Now, joining us is Courage Mbon, who's a journalist and media consultant. Good morning, Mr. Mbon. Thanks for joining us.
A very good morning to you, and thanks for having me.
Of course, I would like to first of all start by asking the effect of gulping gin and beer, in protest. How effective is that in changing the government's plans?
Okay, first of all, you must understand that there are dialectic and ethnic significances to things that people do during protest. And so in the course of making agitations, people want to do relevant acts that are relevant to their ethnic leanings and all of that. For instance, do you ask your elderly ones why they pour dry gin and alcohol on the ground and call it incantations? Do ancient or do ancestors actually wake up to drink those things? So these are just a representations of their ethnic leanings and all of that. So it's just relevant, I think, to. And remember that these people are riverine areas who do not joke with alcohol. It's not. If you look at it very closely, most of them wake up under very moist and humid climatic
conditions, and so they start
conditions.
They start
and
the
so
day
in
with,
the morning,
with a shot of.
I at some point in my career, I did a report, about Eastern Obolo, in fact, that coastal, area of Akwa Ibom State, and I had to stay there for 1 week. And you are speaking to someone at 6:30 a.m. because he's going to go into the water, once daybreak. He needs to, go and check on his net and all of that. 5:30, 6 a.m. He's already drunk. He's talking to you and you can perceive alcohol coming. No, you can make sense of what he's saying because they've taken these substances over time.
And they're used
to it. They're used to it. And I spoke with one of them and asked them, why do you guys take this thing this early in the day? And he says, Courage, I'm going to take you one day, to come with us to the water. I went with him, I threw up in the water over 5 times, so I understood with them. So these are just basically activities and things that are consistent with their geographical habitats.
Let's now move into the discussion proper, and get blessings to kickstart the conversation.
I mean, Courage, we're seeing that the youth are protesting the remapping. For those who do not understand, what exactly is this remapping about?
Okay, Blessing. First of all, the House of Assembly, the Akwa Ibom State House of Assembly, acting on Section 8, Sub 4A to B of the Nigerian Constitution, set out. Of course, that provision of that Constitution says that I think it just has to do with asking, the remapping of areas, remapping of states, of the state, and all of that. So acting on the provisions of that Constitution, I think I can just read some of the provisions of that Constitution out if you have the time for it. And a bill for a law of a House of Assembly for the purpose of boundary adjustment of any existing local government shall only be passed if the request for that boundary adjustment is supported by 2/3 majority of the House of Assembly, members of the Assembly representing the area demanding and the area affected by the adjustment, and all of that and all that legal jargons. First of all, let me say here, that you don't need to be, a student of law to see that those provisions are very incoherent. But again, also, it's safe for us to note that the House of Assembly is made of representations from all parts of the state. And so if the State House of Assembly is making a law, it is assumed that the representatives of these communities, of these local government areas, go back to their people, communicate in clear terms the provision of this new law to their people. And so the people would come back to town. I mean, yes, the representatives will come back to Uyo, which is the state capital, to sit and make these laws. But unfortunately, that is just the ideal situation. In the reality, most times representatives, once they are elected, hardly hold meetings, they hardly hold engagements with the constituents. And so you find laws that are being made, and these laws are inconsistent with the yearnings and agitations of the people of these communities. And so in Akwa Ibom State, what you are just seeing is a typical representation of the gap that exists between the legislature and the people. I have not because the law has just been sent to the governor. We've not had a sent yet, and so it's not been made public officially yet. And so most of these people who are, protesting the remapping of Akwa Ibom State are doing so on.
All right. Well, we may have very brief connection issues there, but he is making a really strong point. That before some of these decisions were taken or these bills were sent in the State House of Assembly, there are representatives of those regions there, and so they were either quiet while these things were taking place, or they
just boundaries of my farmland. Okay. It is only normal for me to be agitated when you come and say, "Oh, this place you buried your father. This place your grandfather was buried." We want to adjust the boundary of this community. It is only normal for people, members of these communities, to be agitated. They want to know, am I going to sleep in my house today, in my local government in Ibesikpo, and wake up tomorrow in another person's local government? And remember that members of these coastal communities are still, the wounds of the Bakassi, remapping are still fresh in their memories. Most of our people, from Baka, in these coastal regions, are actually refugees right now, because they had to be shifted down from Bakassi. When the remapping was done, and Bakassi, they woke up one morning and they were told that Bakassi, which is the ancestral homeland, belongs to Kanu.
Yeah.
And guess what happens? Once this happens, the owners of the land come to your land, where you have always known to be your land, and tell you, look, this place now belongs to so and so place. And so you become a refugee automatically in your homeland.
Courage. Let's also hear, from the government side, because I've also read some articles concerning this, and I see that one of the excuses is that Akwa Ibom State doesn't have a regional map. There's that, and then someone also mentioned that this would end border disputes. So these are some of the excuses that have been shared. So can you quickly respond to any both of them? That Akwa Ibom doesn't have an original map, and what's the reason the government is given?
Yeah, the reasons you've put forward are the reasons the government, when you say the government, basically I think it's just the House of Assembly right now, because the state governor made a remark at an event, which was the a prayer event he holds, and all of that. The state governor, His Excellency Mr. Duke Governor, made that remark that Akwa Ibom does not have an original map, and that's contestable if you want to look at it, because I don't think there's an area in Nigeria that doesn't have a map, so that is contestable. But again, too, we must not also lose sight of the fact that what he also said about, border disputes are actually true. There are areas in Akwa Ibom State that you cannot farm in that area because, these people, although they belong to the same ethnic groups, although they speak the same languages, in most cases, but some of these people have been demarcated. They say, okay, you belong to this local government, these other people belong to this local government. By that sheer act of, demarcation, there are disputes between these, brethren. Permit me to call them so. So that is actually true. These disputes exist. But like I said, these excuses are contestable. Because when you look at it very closely, you see that when you, as a government or the House of Assembly, because in this case it is the House of Assembly doing this remapping, have you effectively communicated to your constituents, members of the Assembly now, that this is done in your best interest? I saw also, I don't know if you've also seen that the paramount rulers of all local governments in Akwa Ibom State went together,
Yes, I saw that article also.
And they endorsed that remapping. Now that shows that the government could actually be acting in the best interest of the people.
But then again, some people are saying that stakeholders and community leaders were not consulted.
So this is the point. This is my argument. Constituents have not been carried along, to the best of my knowledge. These people, House of Assembly members, have not gone back, which is part of their constitutional responsibilities, to inform their constituents that this is what we're doing, and we're doing it in your best interest. When you carry a child to go and give injection at immunization, you see that child kicks, that child cries. Why is the child crying? The child doesn't understand that the pain that you're inflicting on me at this point is supposed to prevent me from being crippled in the future. So if that child were to be of age and cognitive reasoning, you will be able to tell the child, oh, endure this pain for a few moments because it will prevent you from having crisis in the future. And so these youths are of age. These constituents are of age. The representatives should, as a matter of urgency, go back before this law is signed. It's already late because people are already in the streets. People are already protesting. They do not know what the future holds for them. You are telling them, I'm going to adjust your boundaries. If I live in a boundary area, I would be worried.
All right, final question.
When building a house in a boundary area, I would be worried.
All right, just a quick question before we wrap up. There's also the insinuations that this is, might be done because of the new Petroleum Industry Act, and of course, to make some communities oil-producing states or something like that. Is there any truth to this? If you can take this in 1 minute.
Like I said, until the new map is made public, we can only speculate. Do you understand? Until this new map, issues of boundary adjustment. I come from a rural community, and I'm well in touch with my community. So issues of boundary adjustments have never been peaceful anywhere. Even if it is families, the day you want to divide land or share lands amongst the children, that is the day you would know the true character of those children. You would see this one say, oh, why is he getting this? Why is he getting this? All that we are saying right now are speculations. We have not seen, the new map has not been made public. In fact, yesterday on social media, the people made mock maps, showing the local government that the governor comes from, which is Ona, being larger, than all other local governments. In fact, it took the entire coastal region of Akwa Ibom State. So these are some of the issues that people are complaining about. Some people are saying, hey, you want to cede some of our lands to the governor's local government, so that the governor's local government can also be an oil-producing community and all of that. These are mere speculations. We cannot comment on this map until we see it, which is what I keep saying. This map should have been made public. People should have made inputs. People should have been consulted. You should have spoken to people and said, oh, is this, because, at the end of the day, the onus rests on the government to decide where the boundary lies.
All right.
At the end of the day.
Absolutely.
But these people should have still been consulted. The map should have been made public.
All right. We of course, will continue to follow up this story, and we hope that the Akwa Ibom State government and governor, rather, listens to the voices of the people and hears what their opinions are on some of all of these and does the right thing. Thanks for your time. We'd love to speak with you again, and have a great day ahead.
You too. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. While the people of Akwa Ibom take their shots of gin.
I just knew you were going to say that.
Let's share with you what's still to come this morning on Breakfast Central.
Well, still to come, witches and wizards endorse Tinubu's inauguration.
And we get to share with you what our top story of the day is.
Village Square Africa, now showing Monday to Thursday, 2 p.m. West African time and 4 p.m. East African time.
Our youth are the most important national asset that we have.
Did you hear the stories of Africans who fought for their independence, bringing a wave of 30 free countries in just 10 years? Did you hear of the heroes who fought battles that are just like yours? They courageously marched against bad governance, police brutality, and oppression. You're not the first in these battlefields.
Amazon is in green. Camacho Quinn second from the left. The Olympic champion's been left a little bit at the start by Armstrong.
Those stories may be hard to find in the mix of foreign priority, perspective and agenda, but our stories will definitely find future generations. The fearless generation of tomorrow will know the battles that we are fighting and the giant strides we're making in technology, art, music, movies, business and more. They will know our wins and losses, our stories and the influences of our evolving and diverse cultures. They'll learn from our mistakes, appreciate our progress and build on successes. With our stories and their relentless ambition, we will be one step closer to the Africa of our dreams. Because whatever happens today across Africa, News Central will amplify those stories that define our times. News Central Television. We are Africa first.
News Central ní ẹ̀ ń wò.
As Nigeria joined the rest of the world to mark International Workers' Day yesterday, the 1st of May, a former presidential candidate, Omoyele Sowore, has asked the federal government to pay workers between 100,000 naira to 250,000 naira as monthly remuneration. Omoyele made this appeal via his Facebook page where he wrote this. He said this: "Today is International Workers' Day. The laborer is worthy of his wages. Pay Nigerian workers a living wage between 100,000 to 250,000 naira." As expected, this has elicited quite some reactions from users of the social media. Let's take a look at them straight away. Ayo Samuel says, "The workers themselves are still blinded by tribalism and religious sentiment. Don't waste your energy. They like their oppressors." Wow. Bitcoin Marshall says, "It's not too much to ask when 100,000 is not even up to 140 euros. That's according to Bitcoin Marshall. DJ Spicy goes on to say, "The minimum wage in Nigeria is 30,000 naira. It's nothing to write home about at all. Things keep increasing, but minimum wage isn't. And you want people to keep surviving on that? That's a big question," from DJ Spicy. Let's take a look at one more remark, one more comment on this story. D Zigna says, "It's not too much to ask for. Rather, they are being paid less than the cost of a bag of rice." And that's really, really, really sad. Currently, Nigeria's minimum wage is at 30,000 naira for federal and state, and it was approved in 2019 following the passage of the minimum wage bill by the National Assembly. This amounts to approximately 65.148 USD per month in 2023. And that's really alarming. Now let's move on to another story still in Nigeria, where the White Witches and Wizards Association of Nigeria has rallied support for the inauguration of the president-elect Asiwaju Bola Tinubu on May 29. The association also urged Nigerians to pray for a smooth transition of power to the president-elect, while warning against any attempts by disgruntled politicians to disrupt Tinubu's inauguration. Well, let's take a look at just some of the things they said. Now, spokesperson of the group, Okwe Obo, in a statement, assured Tinubu of their efforts to cleanse and detoxify the Abuja environment for him to operate in. They also warned against any attempts by disgruntled politicians to disrupt Tinubu's inauguration. They claimed that Tinubu was the winner of their spiritual presidential election conducted before the February terrestrial election. And they also stated that the president-elect needs only prayers now, prayers for good health and long life from all Nigerians. We're going to look at some of the reactions to this story on social media straight away. That is from Ekerson Money. Ekerson goes on to say that witches and wizards are telling us that Tinubu needs prayers. Which kind of witches and wizards are this? Abi, God gets him own witches and wizards. That's according to Ekerson. More reactions to this story. Samson DK goes on to say, if he knows that he's not worthy, why run for president? Please, we have important things to pray about, I beg. That's according to Samson. My lawyer, Sabi, says, choose a side, prayers or witchcraft. We are confused now. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Echo Boy goes on to put out this lengthy comment. It says, witches and wizards, this is a disgraceful display of moral bankruptcy that should be condemned roundly by any sane person who cherishes human decency. It says the fact that such pernicious and insidiously destructive elements are given a platform to promote their nefarious agenda is a betrayal of the noble values that underpin national decency. It goes on to say political megalomania is on the upward trajectory. Irresponsible behaviors have continued to shape the state of our polity. And it says, say no to political malversation and political witchcraft. Well, that's as much as we can take on Trend Wave today. I must say that's quite interesting, you know, what's going on in Nigeria at the moment. I mean, Witches and Wizards Association coming ahead to say that we should pray for the president-elect, and people are asking questions that for me are very cogent questions, asking questions like, if the president-elect isn't well in health, why do we have to go through this? Why do we have to be the ones to carry it on our, you know, be the ones to take charge in terms of praying? And why is there a Witches and Wizards Association also telling us to pray? So many things are just wrong. So many things are not right, I must say. But I want Blessings and Osaoge to just come in here.
Osaoge had questions while you were speaking.
I did. I was really just confused. I mean, I agree with those who say why witches asking, you know, us to pray. But at the same time, I really just wish that they would come out in the open, because we've heard about the Wizards Association. They are always out every now and then. I remember that they said that they were taking the fight to Boko Haram. I remember they said that Atiku Abubakar should stop contesting in 2019, I think. I remember they said Goodluck Jonathan was going to win the 2015 elections. So they've gotten it wrong a couple of times. They've also not been able to defeat Boko Haram. But I wish that they would show themselves. Like, who are these people? You know,
like
who
I would
led the
like to see.
organization? I want to see them.
I really want to see.
Maybe one of their attributes is anonymity.
Oh. Well, no, I don't think so. They have names. They can write articles. They can, address the press. They can put.
But
out
how are we even
statements.
sure those are their real names? That's another thing.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not saying that they don't exist. I know they exist. I have exes.
You do.
You didn't do that. You didn't just do that.
The point is, I would like that they show themselves. It would probably make it more interesting. Just seeing the faces of these people. I don't want to have.
And what do they mean by terrestrial election? Terrestrial election and spiritual election.
Yeah, they probably have elections under the sea, and So to be honest, these things exist, and I wouldn't act ignorant and say, oh, it's all just nonsense. It does exist. I don't know that they're actually putting out statements, but it does exist.
But let's talk about that of Showore. It says that workers should be paid between 100,000 naira to 250,000 naira, and I do agree with that. Because things are really increasing at the moment. So people still earning below 30,000 naira. It's terrible.
Yeah, I think myself and Oselgi were talking about it earlier, and it's not that the government cannot do it. It is whether or not they will do it. And 100 to 250, is it feasible? We're talking from 30, even increasing it from 30 to 60 and 70, there'll be lots of protests and lots of agitation and all of that. So it's not like it's impossible, but will they do it?
But the chances are pretty slim, But once again, I think Nigeria needs to move into be a country that earns, at least 50 times more than it's currently earning, and not just from oil. It needs to increase on its earnings. It needs to save more. It needs to also block leakages, and we will be able to, afford to pay our workers better. If Nigeria improves on its economy, these things, are no-brainers, and you wouldn't even need to argue or have conversations about this. It's embarrassing. That we barely export anything. We make a lot of money from oil, and it's all, most of it is squandered. We have, pipelines that are, oil being stolen in different parts of the country. We have, customs, immigration, different places where funds just continue going missing, and, Nigeria can account for it. We have a National Assembly and, Auditor General that puts out a report every year showing where billions and billions and billions of naira are siphoned and just diverted and go missing, and nobody does anything about it. So, yes, we can afford it if we're a serious country, but Nigeria is not.
But I think it's not even just Nigeria that is asking for pay rise. If you look at the news headlines across board, Zimbabwe is asking for that. Zimbabwe is even asking for beyond 100% increase. I mean, that's quite interesting.
I agree. Yeah. Well, who do you think can afford it? I think Nigeria can. I don't know much, about Zimbabwe, but we need to go. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Liz, for stopping by.
Always a pleasure, guys.
All right. Now let's quickly share with you what comes up later today on News Central TV.
At 1 p.m., we have Beyond the Continent.
And at 2 p.m. West African time, we're taking you across Village Square, Africa.
And of course, at 5 p.m., one slot comes up.
All right, and this is where we say goodbye. Thank you so much for starting your Tuesday morning with us. We hope that you have a very, very interesting day ahead. Of course, prayers up to those in Sudan. Remember that there are still rescue efforts taking place to get people to safety. But most importantly, we pray that the war and the fighting comes to an end. And also to the Kenyan government, Africa is waiting. To the people in the Shakahola forest and in that region, Kifili region, I think, Africa is waiting to hear what happened. We would like to see the end of this, this conversation.
Definitely, definitely. Investigations are still ongoing, and we are hoping to see how it turns out. And definitely News Central will be here to give you the update. Thank you again for joining us. Till we see you again, I'm Blessings Musuru.
And I am Osalgi Ogbon. See you tomorrow.